HOA Karen spotted 12-year-old Emma feeding birds from her wheelchair and screamed about broken rules. When Emma refused to stop, the furious woman grabbed her hand and bit down hard. 3 minutes later, Emma's CEO father pulled into the driveway and saw his daughter's bleeding hand with clear teeth marks. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. The morning sun cast a warm glow over Riverside Heights, a quiet suburban neighborhood where every lawn was perfectly trimmed and every house looked picture perfect. It was the kind of place where people waved politely but rarely talked, where rules mattered more than relationships. 12-year-old Emma sat in her wheelchair on the front porch, her face bright with joy. She scattered breadcrumbs on the ground, watching as sparrows and finches hopped closer. A small blue jay landed on her armrest, and Emma giggled softly. "Mom, look! He's so close!" Emma called through the open door. Her mother, Rachel, smiled from the kitchen where she was preparing lunch. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. Just be gentle." Emma had been born with cerebral palsy. It affected her legs and made walking impossible, but it never dimmed her spirit. She loved animals, especially birds. Every morning for the past month, she had been feeding them, learning to recognize the different species that visited their yard. Down the street, Margaret Foster was watching from her window. She was the head of the Homeowners Association, a position she took very seriously. Too seriously, most neighbors thought. Everyone called her HOA Karen behind her back, though never to her face. People were too afraid of her. Margaret grabbed her HOA rulebook and marched toward Emma's house. Her face was set in a deep frown, her steps quick and angry. "Excuse me, young lady." Margaret's voice cut through the peaceful morning like a knife. Emma jumped, startled. The birds scattered immediately, flying away in a rush of wings. Emma looked up at the tall woman standing at the bottom of the porch steps. "Hello, Mrs. Foster," Emma said quietly, her voice a little uncertain. "What do you think you're doing?" Margaret demanded, holding up her rulebook. "I'm just feeding the birds," Emma replied. "They come every morning now. I can tell them apart." "That's against the rules," Margaret interrupted sharply. She flipped through her book and pointed at a page. Section 8.3 clearly states that feeding wildlife on residential property is prohibited. It creates mess, attracts pests, and lowers property values. Rachel heard the raised voice and came outside quickly. "Is there a problem, Mrs. Foster?" "Yes, there's a problem. Your daughter is violating HOA regulations," Margaret said, her voice cold. "This needs to stop immediately." "She's just a child enjoying nature," Rachel said, trying to keep her voice calm. "It's just a few crumbs. The birds clean up everything." "I don't care," Margaret snapped. "Rules are rules. Everyone in this neighborhood must follow them. No exceptions." By now, several neighbors had heard the commotion. Mr. Chen from next door peeked out his window. Mrs. Rodriguez across the street opened her door slightly. But nobody came out to help. Everyone knew Margaret's power in the HOA. She could make life miserable with fines, violation notices, and endless inspections. "Please, Mrs. Foster," Rachel said. "Can't we discuss this reasonably? She's not hurting anyone." "There's nothing to discuss," Margaret said. Her face was turning red with anger. "If this doesn't stop right now, I'll issue a fine. $500 for the first violation." Emma's eyes filled with tears. She didn't understand why the kind thing she was doing was wrong. "But the birds need food," she said softly. "They depend on me now." "I don't care about the birds," Margaret said harshly. She walked up the porch steps toward Emma's wheelchair. "Give me that bread bag. This ends now." "No," Emma said, clutching the small bag of breadcrumbs to her chest. "Please, I promise I'll clean up everything. Please don't take it." Margaret reached for the bag. I said give it to me. Emma held on tightly. The bag tore slightly as Margaret tried to pull it from her hands. Breadcrumbs spilled onto the porch. Let go of my daughter. Rachel shouted, rushing forward. But Margaret was so consumed with anger that she lost all control. She grabbed Emma's wrist hard, twisting it. Emma cried out in pain. When Emma still wouldn't release the bag, Margaret did something unthinkable. She bit Emma's hand. Emma screamed. The sound was pure shock and pain. She let go of the bag immediately, pulling her hand back. There were clear teeth marks on her small hand, already turning red. A small amount of blood appeared on her skin. Rachel was frozen for a split second, unable to believe what she had just seen. You bit her, she screamed. You actually bit my child. Margaret seemed surprised by her own actions. She stepped back, her face showing confusion for just a moment. But then her anger returned. She wouldn't follow the rules, Margaret said defensively. Sometimes people need to learn the hard way. Emma was crying hard now, holding her injured hand against her chest. Rachel knelt beside the wheelchair and carefully examined the wound. The bite marks were deep and clear. Get off my property right now, Rachel said, her voice shaking with fury and shock. And don't you ever come near my daughter again. I'm reporting this family to the HOA board, Margaret said, straightening her clothes. There will be serious consequences for this behavior. As Margaret walked away, Rachel saw the neighbors watching from their windows and doorways. Not one of them came out. Not one offered help or asked if Emma was okay. They all just watched silently, then slowly disappeared back into their houses. Rachel helped Emma inside and cleaned the wound carefully. She put antibacterial cream on it and wrapped it with a clean bandage. Emma was still crying, not just from physical pain but from confusion and fear. Why did she hurt me, Mom? Emma asked between sobs. I was just being nice to the birds. I don't know, baby, Rachel said, fighting back her own tears. Some people forget how to be kind. Rachel looked at the clock. Her husband David's plane should have landed by now. He had been away on a business trip for 3 days. He was the CEO of a major software company, always busy with meetings and deals. But when it came to his family, nothing else mattered. She texted him, come home as soon as you can. Emergency with Emma. 3 minutes later, David's car pulled into the driveway. He had seen the text while still at the airport and immediately got in a taxi, leaving his luggage to be delivered later. When he walked through the front door, he knew something was seriously wrong. Rachel was holding Emma, who was still crying softly. The bandage on her hand was visible immediately. What happened? David asked, his voice instantly serious. He dropped his briefcase and went straight to his daughter. Daddy, Emma said, trying to smile through her tears. David knelt beside her wheelchair. Princess, what happened to your hand? Emma looked at her mother, then back at her father. Mrs. Foster bit me, she said quietly. Someone bit you? David's face changed completely. Who bit you? Tell me exactly what happened. Rachel explained everything. As she spoke, David's expression grew darker and darker. His jaw clenched. His hands formed fists. But when he spoke to Emma, his voice stayed gentle. Can you show Daddy what happened? He asked softly. Emma carefully unwrapped the bandage. The bite marks were unmistakable. They were red, swollen, and clearly showed the pattern of human teeth. David stared at his daughter's injured hand for a long moment. Rachel had never seen him look so angry, but he kept his composure in front of Emma. Did anyone help you? He asked Rachel. No, she said. The neighbors all watched, but nobody did anything. David stood up slowly. He walked to the front door and opened it wide. He stepped onto the porch and looked around the neighborhood. He could see curtains moving in several windows. The neighbors were still watching. His voice was loud and clear when he spoke. My name is David Morrison. 3 minutes ago, I came home to find that someone in this neighborhood bit my disabled daughter. She is 12 years old. She was feeding birds. More neighbors appeared in their doorways now, listening. I know you all saw what happened, David continued. I know you watched a grown woman attack my child. And I know that none of you did anything to help. Mr. Chen stepped onto his porch, looking uncomfortable. We didn't want to cause trouble, he said weakly. A child was being hurt and you didn't want to cause trouble? David asked. What if it was your child? Mrs. Rodriguez opened her door fully. We were scared of Mrs. Foster, she admitted. She has power in the HOA. She can make our lives very difficult. So you let her make my daughter's life difficult instead? David asked. Nobody had an answer. David went back inside and picked up his phone. He made his first call to 911, reporting an assault on his daughter. The second call was to his lawyer. The third call was to a private investigator he kept on retainer. The fourth call was to his assistant. Clear my schedule for the next 2 weeks, he told her. I have a personal matter that requires my full attention. Within 30 minutes, 2 police officers arrived. They took photographs of Emma's hand from multiple angles. They wrote down detailed statements from both Emma and Rachel. Then they went to speak with Margaret Foster. Margaret tried to explain that she was simply enforcing community rules. But the officers told her that biting a child was assault, regardless of the circumstances. She's disabled, Margaret protested. She shouldn't get special treatment. Being disabled doesn't make it okay to hurt her, Officer Johnson said. In fact, assaulting a disabled child is considered more serious. They issued Margaret a citation and informed her that criminal charges would likely be filed. That evening, David sat with Emma while she ate dinner. She was feeling better physically, but still confused about why someone would hurt her. Daddy, will I get in trouble for feeding the birds? She asked. No, Princess, David said. You won't get in trouble. What you did was kind. Sometimes rules are wrong, and sometimes people use rules to be mean. That's not okay. Can I still feed the birds? Emma asked hopefully. We'll make sure you can, David promised. That night, after Emma was asleep, David spent hours reading every single HOA document for their community. He also had his investigator research Margaret Foster's background. What he discovered made him even angrier. Margaret had a history of complaints against her going back years. She had targeted other families, especially those who were different in any way. An interracial couple had been harassed about their yard decorations. A family with an autistic son had been cited repeatedly for noise violations when the child had meltdowns. An elderly veteran with PTSD had been fined for not maintaining his lawn during a particularly difficult period. But nobody had ever fought back. They were all too afraid. David was not afraid. The next morning, he dressed in his best suit and drove to the offices of Prestige Property Management, the company that ran their HOA. He walked into the main office with confidence. I need to speak with your regional director, he told the receptionist. Do you have an appointment? She asked. No, but I believe they'll want to see me immediately, David said calmly. Tell them David Morrison is here regarding a serious legal matter involving their HOA manager. 20 minutes later, David was sitting across from the regional director, Richard Coleman. Mr. Morrison, I understand there was an unfortunate incident, Coleman began. Unfortunate incident? David interrupted. Your HOA manager bit my disabled daughter. That's not an incident. That's a crime. He placed a folder on the desk. These are complaints against Margaret Foster spanning 5 years. Your company has allowed her to harass residents without any consequences. Coleman opened the folder, his face growing more uncomfortable as he read through the documents. Now she has escalated to physically attacking a child, David continued. My child. He placed another document on the desk. This is a letter from my attorney. We are filing a lawsuit against Margaret Foster, your company, and the HOA board. We're suing for assault, negligence, failure to supervise, and discrimination against a disabled child. Coleman's eyes widened. Mr. Morrison, I'm sure we can reach some kind of agreement. Oh, we will reach an agreement, David said. But it won't be quiet, and it won't be cheap. This is going to be very public. He stood up. You have 24 hours to respond to my attorney. After that, we go to the media. David didn't stop there. That afternoon, he went door to door in the neighborhood. He spoke to every family personally. At the Chen house, he knocked firmly. Mr. Chen answered nervously. Mr. Morrison, Mr. Chen said. About yesterday. You watched my daughter get hurt and did nothing, David said directly. I want to know why. Mr. Chen looked down. Mrs. Foster has been HOA president for 6 years. She's driven out families who opposed her. She can make your life impossible with fines and violations. So you chose to protect yourself instead of protecting a child, David said. We were wrong, Mr. Chen admitted quietly. I'm ashamed. You can still do the right thing, David said. There's going to be a hearing about Margaret Foster. Will you speak up about what you've witnessed? Mr. Chen hesitated. What if she retaliates? I'll make sure she can't hurt anyone else, David promised. He had similar conversations with every neighbor. Some were defensive. Some were ashamed. But many agreed to finally speak up. 2 days later, the local newspaper ran a story. The headline read, HOA President Bites Disabled Child Over Bird Feeding. The story went viral on social media. People were outraged. The management company's phones rang constantly with angry calls. News stations picked up the story. Margaret tried to defend herself in a television interview, but she only made things worse. The rules apply to everyone, she told the reporter. I don't care if the child is disabled. But you bit her, the reporter said. She wouldn't listen, Margaret insisted. Sometimes people need strong correction. The interview clip went viral. Thousands of people commented, almost all of them condemning Margaret's actions and attitude. David used his business connections to ensure the story stayed in the news. He wanted everyone to see what kind of person had been running their HOA. 1 week later, an emergency HOA board meeting was called. The community center was packed. People who had never attended a meeting before came to show support for the Morrison family. Margaret sat at the front table with other board members. She looked angry and defiant, not apologetic. David stood to speak first. 1 week ago, this woman bit my 12-year-old disabled daughter, he said, pointing at Margaret. My daughter was feeding birds on our own property. She was doing nothing harmful. He held up a large photo of Emma's injured hand. Several people in the audience gasped. This is what happens when bullies are given power and nobody stops them, David continued. One by one, other residents stood up to share their own stories about Margaret. The interracial couple described years of harassment. The family with the autistic child talked about constant violations and threats. The elderly veteran explained how Margaret had shown no compassion during his difficult times. The stories continued for nearly 2 hours. It became clear that Margaret had been terrorizing the community for years. When Margaret finally spoke, she was still defensive. I was doing my job, she said. Someone has to enforce the rules. Nobody else wanted to do it. Your job doesn't include biting children, someone shouted from the back. That girl needed to learn respect for rules, Margaret shot back. The room erupted in angry voices. People couldn't believe she was still defending her actions. The board voted unanimously to remove Margaret from all HOA positions immediately. But David wasn't finished. The following week, the the police arrested Margaret on charges of assault and child abuse. The prosecutor decided to pursue the case aggressively because the evidence was clear and the victim was a disabled child. David also followed through on his lawsuit. He wasn't interested in the money for himself. His family was financially comfortable. But he wanted systemic change. His attorney discovered that Prestige Property Management had received multiple complaints about Margaret over the years but had done nothing. They were held liable for negligent supervision. The case settled for a substantial amount. David donated most of the money to organizations supporting disabled children and their families. But he kept some aside for a special purpose. The settlement also included major changes to the HOA. New rules were written specifically protecting residents from harassment. A formal complaint process was established that couldn't be controlled by one person. The new guidelines emphasized that differences, including disabilities, should be respected and accommodated, not punished. Mr. Chen started a neighborhood watch program focused on helping each other rather than finding rule violations. Mrs. Rodriguez organized community gardens where children could interact with nature safely. The neighborhood began to transform. People talked to each other more. They helped each other instead of reporting each other. 3 months later, Emma was back on her front porch feeding birds. But now she wasn't alone. Other children from the neighborhood joined her regularly. Their parents brought bird seed and helped build proper feeding stations. Margaret had moved out of the neighborhood after her legal troubles. Nobody missed her. Emma's hand had healed completely, leaving only the faintest scar. But the experience had changed her. She was more confident now, knowing her father would always protect her and that the community had finally learned to stand up for what was right. David worked from home more often now. He had learned that being a successful CEO meant nothing if he couldn't protect the people he loved most. One morning, he watched Emma laughing with her friends while they fed the birds. Rachel came and stood beside him. "You know what the best part is?" she said. "What's that?" David asked. "She's not afraid anymore," Rachel said. For weeks after it happened, she was scared to go outside. But look at her now. David smiled as he watched his daughter teach a younger boy how to hold his hand still so a bird would eat from his palm. "She's stronger than both of us," David said proudly. "She gets that strength from you," Rachel replied. That evening at dinner, Emma had an announcement. "Daddy, I want to start a club," she said. "What kind of club, princess?" David asked. "A club for kids who are different," Emma explained. "So they know they're not alone. And so they know it's okay to be different." David felt his heart swell with pride. His daughter had taken the worst experience of her young life and wanted to turn it into something positive. "I think that's a wonderful idea," he said. "How can I help? Can we use one of your meeting rooms sometimes?" Emma asked. "You can use whatever you need," David promised. 3 months later, Emma's club had 15 members. They met every other Saturday at David's company headquarters. The kids shared experiences, supported each other, and worked on projects to help their community. The local news did a feature story about the club. Emma, now 13, was interviewed about why she started it. "Bad things happen sometimes," she told the reporter. "But you can choose to let them make you mean, or you can choose to let them make you kind. I choose kind." "What would you say to other kids who might be going through something similar?" the reporter asked. "Tell someone you trust," Emma said. "Don't keep it a secret. And remember that being different isn't bad. It's just different. The world needs all kinds of people." As the interview aired that evening, David sat with his family watching their daughter speak with confidence and wisdom. He thought about that day when he had come home to find his daughter hurt and his neighbors silent. He had been angrier than ever before in his life. But that anger had become action. And that action had changed not just their lives, but their entire community. Margaret was gone. But the lessons remained. Sometimes one person has to stand up first. Sometimes one person has to be brave enough to say, "This is wrong," before others will find their courage. David had used his resources and position to protect his daughter. But Emma had used her experience to protect others. As he watched his daughter on television talking about kindness and courage, David realized something important. He had thought he was protecting Emma from the world. But really, Emma was showing the world how to be better. The birds still came to their front porch every morning. Emma still fed them, now with help from friends and neighbors. And in Riverside Heights, everyone had learned a crucial lesson. When someone needs protection, you don't stay silent. You stand up. You speak out. You do what's right. Even if it's scary. Even if it's hard. Because that's what makes a real community. People who take care of each other, especially those who need protection most. And sometimes, it only takes 3 minutes for everything to change. 6 months after the club started, something unexpected happened. Emma received a letter in the mail. It was from a law firm in the city. David opened it carefully, reading it first before showing Emma. His expression was surprised. "What is it, Dad?" Emma asked. "It's from Margaret Foster's attorney," David said. "She wants to meet with you." Rachel looked shocked. "Absolutely not. That woman hurt our daughter." "Wait," David said, reading further. "She's not asking for forgiveness or trying to reduce her sentence. She says she wants to apologize in person. She's been in therapy and wants to make amends as part of her recovery process." Emma was quiet for a moment. "I want to hear what she has to say," she finally said. "Emma, you don't have to do this," Rachel said firmly. "You don't owe her anything." "I know, Mom," Emma said. "But maybe she changed. Maybe she learned something. I want to know." After much discussion, David agreed to arrange a meeting. But he set strict conditions. It would be in his office, with both parents present, and Emma could leave at any moment if she felt uncomfortable. 2 weeks later, Margaret Foster walked into David's office. She looked completely different. Her hair was grayer, her face was thinner, and most noticeably, the anger that had always defined her expression was gone. She looked tired and sad. She sat down across from Emma, keeping a respectful distance. For a long moment, she just looked at the young girl she had hurt. "Emma," Margaret began, her voice shaking slightly. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I need you to know that what I did was wrong. Completely, terribly wrong." Emma listened quietly, her hands folded in her lap. "I've been in therapy for 6 months," Margaret continued. "I've learned that I was angry at the world for a long time. My husband left me years ago. My children don't speak to me. I had no real friends. So I took that anger and turned it into control. The HOA rules gave me power, and I used that power to hurt people." Tears began falling down Margaret's face. "When I bit you, I saw the shock in your eyes. And for just a second, I realized what I had become. A monster. Someone who would hurt a child over breadcrumbs." Rachel's hand tightened on Emma's shoulder, but Emma remained calm. "I lost everything after that day," Margaret said. "My position, my reputation, my home. But I deserved to lose it all. What I didn't deserve was the chance to get better. But my therapist says healing starts with taking responsibility." She reached into her bag and pulled out a small notebook. "I've written letters to everyone I hurt over the years. The Chin family. The Rodriguez family. The veteran, Mr. Patterson. Everyone. Most won't read them, and I understand why. But I needed to write them." Margaret looked directly at Emma. "You were feeding birds because you're kind. You saw creatures that needed help, and you helped them. I saw a rule being broken and cared more about that than about kindness. I was wrong. You were right." Emma was quiet for a long moment. Then she spoke. Mrs. Foster, what you did really hurt me. Not just my hand, but my feelings too. I was scared to go outside for a long time. Margaret nodded, more tears falling. I know. I'm so sorry. But, Emma continued, my dad taught me that people can change if they really want to. Are you really changing? I'm trying, Margaret said honestly. Every single day, I'm trying. I volunteer at a children's hospital now. I help kids who are sick or hurt. It doesn't make up for what I did, but it helps me remember what really matters. Emma looked at her parents, then back at Margaret. I don't think we can be friends. And I'm still scared of you a little bit. But I hope you keep trying to be better. That's more than I deserve, Margaret said. Thank you for listening to me. That's more kindness than I showed you. As Margaret stood to leave, David spoke. Mrs. Foster, my daughter is more forgiving than I am. But I'll say this. If you really want to make a difference, there are organizations that help prevent bullying and abuse. Your story could help others recognize the signs before they go too far. Margaret nodded. My therapist suggested the same thing. I've been afraid to share my story publicly. But maybe it's time. After she left, Rachel held Emma close. I'm so proud of you, sweetheart. That took real courage. She looked so sad, Mom, Emma said. I think she really is sorry. Maybe, David said. Time will tell. But you showed her more grace than most people would. 3 months later, Emma's club had grown to 30 members. They had started a podcast where kids shared their stories of being different and overcoming challenges. The podcast was gaining popularity, with thousands of downloads each week. One episode featured a surprise guest. Margaret Foster appeared on the show, interviewed by Emma herself. Why did you agree to do this interview? Emma asked, her voice steady and professional. Because I want other people to see what hate and anger can do, Margaret answered. I want parents to recognize if they're using rules to control others instead of to help them. I want people who feel powerless to know that hurting others won't make them feel powerful. It just makes them empty. The episode went viral. News outlets picked it up. Psychologists praised it as a powerful example of restorative justice. Schools started using it in their anti-bullying programs. David watched his daughter conduct the interview with amazement. She asked tough questions but also showed compassion. She didn't let Margaret off the hook, but she also gave her space to share her journey. After the interview, Emma's club received hundreds of messages from kids around the world. Many shared their own stories of being bullied or being the bully. Some thanked Emma for showing them a different way forward. One message came from a teenager in another state, I was becoming like Margaret Foster. I was mean to kids who were different because it made me feel strong. But your interview made me realize I was just scared and angry. I'm getting help now. Thank you for showing me it's not too late to change. Emma read that message to her club members during their next meeting. This is why we do this, she said. Not just to help people like us, but to help everyone understand each other better. The club decided to start a mentorship program. Older kids who had been bullies and changed their ways could mentor younger kids who were struggling with anger or aggression. It was controversial, but Emma believed in it. Hurt people, she explained to a reporter who questioned the program. But healed people can heal people too. David's company became involved, providing funding and resources for the program. Other companies followed. Within a year, the model was being replicated in cities across the country. Emma's story had started with pain and fear. But it had grown into something bigger than anyone could have imagined. She had turned her worst experience into a movement for understanding and change. On the 1-year anniversary of the incident, the neighborhood held a special celebration. They called it Kindness Day. Families gathered in a community park for a picnic. There were games for kids, food trucks, and live music. But the highlight was the unveiling of a new community garden. It was designed to be fully accessible for people with disabilities. Raised beds allowed wheelchair users to garden easily. Wide paths accommodated mobility devices. There were sensory plants for people with visual impairments. A sign at the entrance read, "Emma's Garden, where everyone belongs." Emma cut the ribbon to open the garden, surrounded by friends, family, and neighbors. Even some of the people Margaret had hurt over the years attended, showing how much the community had healed. Mr. Chen gave a speech. "A year ago, we were a neighborhood of strangers living in fear of rules and punishment. Today, we're a community of friends who look out for each other. That change started with one brave girl and one father who refused to stay silent." Mrs. Rodriguez added, "We're ashamed that we didn't help Emma that day. But we're grateful she and her family gave us a second chance to be better neighbors." As the sun set that evening, Emma sat in her wheelchair in the new garden, surrounded by friends. Birds sang in the trees overhead. Butterflies visited the flowers. Children laughed and played on the accessible playground nearby. David and Rachel watched from a bench nearby, holding hands. "Do you ever think about that morning?" Rachel asked quietly. "About what would have happened if you hadn't come home when you did?" "Every day," David admitted. "But I also think about what Emma has built from that pain. She could have stayed angry. She could have stayed scared. Instead, she chose to help others. She's changing the world," Rachel said softly. "One person at a time," David agreed. Emma called out to them. "Mom! Dad! Come see the butterfly house." They joined their daughter, who was excitedly pointing out different butterfly species to younger kids. She knew all their names and characteristics. She had studied them the same way she had studied birds. As David listened to his daughter teach the other children, he realized something profound. Margaret Foster had tried to enforce rules to make the world conform to her vision. But Emma was changing the world by helping people see the beauty in differences. That evening, as they drove home, Emma was quiet in the back seat. "What are you thinking about, Princess?" David asked. "I was thinking about Mrs. Foster," Emma said. "I hope she's okay. I hope she's really getting better." Rachel turned in her seat. "That's very kind of you, sweetheart. Dad always says that everyone deserves a chance to be better," Emma said. "Even people who hurt us." "I did say that," David confirmed. "Though I'll admit, it's harder to believe it when someone hurts your child." "But it's true, right?" Emma asked. "People can change." "Yes," David said firmly. "People can change. But only if they really want to. And only if they do the hard work." When they got home, Emma went straight to her computer. She was working on the next podcast episode. This one would feature 3 former bullies who had turned their lives around and now worked with youth programs. David watched his daughter work, her face serious and focused. She typed with determination, pausing occasionally to think about the right words. Rachel came and stood beside him. "She's going to do something incredible with her life," she said. "She already is," David replied. Late that night, after Emma was asleep, David went out to the front porch. He scattered some bird seed, something he'd started doing every evening. The birds would find it in the morning. He thought about how much had changed in 1 year. A neighborhood divided by fear had become a community united by compassion. A little girl who had been attacked had become a voice for change. A powerful CEO had learned that the most important job he'd ever have was being a father. And somewhere in the city, a woman who had caused so much pain was working to heal herself and help others avoid her mistakes. It was messy and complicated. Forgiveness wasn't simple. Change wasn't easy. But it was possible. David looked up at the stars. "Thank you," he whispered, though he wasn't sure who he was thanking. Maybe the universe. Maybe fate. Maybe just the forces that had brought him home exactly when his daughter needed him most. 3 minutes had changed everything. But it was the year that followed that had transformed everything. As David went back inside, he heard Emma's voice from her bedroom. She was talking in her sleep. "Everyone belongs," she murmured. "Everyone matters." David smiled. His daughter had learned the most important lesson of all. And now she was teaching it to the world. The end came not with dramatic confrontation, but with quiet growth. That's how real change happens. Not in explosive moments, but in daily choices to be better, kinder, and more understanding. And it all started because a CEO father refused to let an injustice against his daughter go unanswered. But more importantly, it continued because a brave young girl chose kindness over bitterness, hope over fear, and change over revenge. 3 minutes can change a life. But a lifetime of choices can change the world.